Hezbollah is one of Iran's largest and most powerful proxies, so much so that it's effectively its own state within the state of Lebanon. Sitting right on the border of Lebanon and Israel, as well as in some areas along the Lebanese and Syrian border, this group has become a professional, battle-tested, and sophisticated fighting force. When assessing Israeli security, as well as political dynamics anywhere along the Mediterranean coast of the Middle East, you absolutely have to account for Hezbollah. But there's quite a lot to account for, and given everything going on in Israel, I think now is a great time that we take a look at Hezbollah at a comprehensive level. We're going to discuss everything, from its goals and mission, to its command structure and chain of command, as well as its support system, history, and more. First, before we get started, make sure you're subscribed because I have more content analyzing this kind of subject matter in shorter, more easy to digest formats. Also, if you would be so kind to leave a like, that really goes a long way to support this channel. Finally, please know that there are a lot of names and terms here that I will do my very best to pronounce correctly. If I goof on any of them, which I likely will, do your very best to absolutely roast me in the comments. But you have to keep that roasting funny and clever. Those are just the rules. Now let's get into how Hezbollah formed and how this has shaped the organization's goals and identity. Hezbollah's original goals reflect the time in which it was formed. In the 1960s and 70s, Shia clerics throughout southern Iraq became popular, which heavily influenced Lebanese Shia clerics like Musa Bakr al-Sadr and Ruhollah Khomeini, who call for Islam to be a counterweight to the secularism and Western ideology spreading in the area at the time. After Saddam forced these clerics to return to Lebanon, they found themselves and other Shia Muslims undergoing increasing persecution by Christians and Sunni Muslims. This ultimately would form the Amal movement under Musa Bakr al-Sadr, which began to become more and more secular as time went on, but we'll discuss this more in a moment. In 1978, Israel invaded and began an occupation of southern Lebanon after attempting to eject the Palestinian Liberation Organization, or PLO. Israel would create a security buffer along southern Lebanon, which would become the target of anger for Lebanese people. Finally, in 1979, the Iranian Revolution would shake the Arab world and would set the conditions for the formation of Hezbollah. This revolution electrified Lebanese Shia Muslims, specifically those who followed the teachings of Ruhollah Khomeini. This quickly led to discussions between Iranian leaders and Lebanese clerics on the formation of an anti-Israeli militant group. These talks would progress slowly until 1982, when Israel would invade Lebanon in a bid to expel the PLO from Lebanon. Iran would quickly provide assistance with the deployment of 5,000 Iranian Revolutionary Guards Corps, or IRGC, troops to Syria. However, within a month, the fighting would end and the majority of these troops would return back to Iran. The remainder of these troops would move into Lebanon to recruit local Shia Muslims and develop a new party of God, or Hezbollah. In 1983, Hezbollah's influence had spread to most corners of Lebanon, and by 1985, Israel would withdraw from Lebanon completely. It's at this time in 1985 when Hezbollah would publish its first open letter where we find their goals. Hezbollah is known formally as the Party of God, Hez being the Arabic word for party and Allah being God, so Hezbollah being the combination of the two words. Their chant is an old classic, Death to Israel. Simply put, one of their main goals stems from a complete non-recognition of the state of Israel nor its right to exist. From their perspective, Israel is a foreign entity occupying what is rightfully Palestinian land, and therefore should be destroyed and the land returned to its people. Along these lines, Hezbollah seek the destruction of U.S. military hegemony in the Middle East. We'll discuss further their history of attacks against both Israel and the United States, but for now, these are their base-level goals. Hezbollah also seeks to establish an Islamic government in Lebanon. With Lebanon being the home to a large Christian population as well, Hezbollah calls for Christians to basically either convert to Islam or stay out of the organization's way. These are the Hezbollah goals as of the open letter published in 1985, which sets these as the fundamental objectives of the group, but since then there have been some minor updates. Among these is the clarification in a statement in 1998 that they do not seek to force Islam on others. They do encourage the adoption of Islam, but they claim that they will coexist peacefully with other religions so long as they peacefully coexist with Islam. This is reflected by Hezbollah's relationships with some far-right Christian groups inside Lebanon and appreciation for those groups' support against Israel in previous conflicts. Since then, Hezbollah has remained fairly consistent in its goals throughout the years, fighting a series of conflicts with Israel and launching attacks against the United States. When looking at Hezbollah, there isn't really anyone else that stands out as the so-called MVP for Hezbollah than Hassan Nasrallah. Nasrallah is Hezbollah's third and current Secretary General and has held the position since 1993. And he has completely transformed Hezbollah from a small band of ragtag terrorists to a large, sophisticated terrorist organization. He's a devout Muslim. There are stories of him as a child preaching Islamic messages despite being from a family of not particularly devout Muslims. Nasrallah's family had to escape Beirut during the Lebanese Civil War in 1975 when they moved to a small town called, and here I'm going to mispronounce this most likely, Basriye. So go ahead and start the roasting here in the comments, which also happened to be the stronghold of the Lebanese Communist Party. This ignited the political fire within Nasrallah and inspired him to begin political activities like joining the aforementioned Amal Party, which with him becoming the village representative at the ripe old age of 15. Once he finished high school, he packed his bags and moved to the Shia holy city of Najaf, Iraq, where he entered into religious studies. There he met a man named Abbas al-Masawi, who would then introduce Nasrallah to Ayatollah Muhammad Baqir al-Sadr, who was also by now the founder of the Islamic Dawah Party in Iraq. Al-Masawi would become Nasrallah's mentor until Saddam Hussein expelled Lebanese clerical students from Najaf in 1978. That same year, shortly after returning home to Lebanon, Nasrallah would marry, and his wife would go on to birth him 5 children. Nasrallah rejoined the Amal Party in 1980, eager to prevent the secularization that had taken hold of the party, working to raise the party's Islamic awareness. This would end in 1982 when Israel would invade Lebanon and Nasrallah would defect from the Amal Party. Nasrallah, as well as several other Islamists, were angry with the Amal Party that had non-Muslim members who had aligned themselves with Israel. As a response, Nasrallah and his fellow defectors would form the Islamic Amal Party, which would quickly gain IRGC support and guidance. This party would later go on to join with the Lebanese Union of Muslim Students, the Lebanese Dawah Party, and other Lebanese Shia groups to form Hezbollah. Nasrallah would become closely aligned to Iran ideologically, supporting an ideology called Wilayat al-Faqih, which is the idea of transforming Lebanon into a part of a larger Islamic state ruled by the supreme leader of Iran. This is a position that Nasrallah and Hezbollah as an organization still hold to this very day. Since Israel withdrew from Lebanon, Nasrallah would travel to Iran again to continue his religious studies, gradually rising in rank and status within Hezbollah until 1993, when he would become the new Secretary General. He would depart from his predecessors with the belief that Hezbollah would engage or should engage with the Lebanese state, and we'll discuss how this has been done shortly. In 2004, Nasrallah would become the head of the Jihad Council, putting Nasrallah at the top of Hezbollah's political, military, and institutional chain of command. Since his appointment, Nasrallah has instituted his thumbprint into how Hezbollah operates. One key imprint is the concept of the Muka Doctrine. Apart from sounding like a type of dance, Muka outlines the theory of victory for Hezbollah, as well as Hamas in Palestine. This doctrine holds to 5 primary tenets, the first of which being that peace is not an option and the fight must be continual. This is to put a constant pressure on the enemy, with the only acceptable pauses being for temporary ceasefires. These ceasefires must be temporary according to the doctrine and are one of the only carve-outs for negotiation with the State of Israel. These ceasefires must also be used diligently to rebuild combat power for the next fight. Ceasefires are also doctrinally appropriate when they include diplomatic wins that repeal the Israeli state, but those ceasefires do not necessitate a larger or lasting peace agreement. The second tenet builds on this notion of continual warfare by declaring that it's not necessary to wait for a balance in power to fight. Instead, clever and unique tactics must be employed by smaller units to fight against larger, more powerful Israeli units. Examples of this include hit-and-run tactics, regular rocket attacks with crude and cheap rocket systems, mortar fire, kidnappings, or even the use of modern drones. The third tenet is colloquially known as blood, not land, where both Hamas and Hezbollah remain enemy-focused and not terrain-focused. Their objective is simple: to kill as many enemies as possible, and if they have to trade terrain for blood, then so be it. This doctrine also plainly declares that civilians are also a declared enemy, and as such, it may even be better to target civilians at times, as they may present themselves as an easier or more convenient target than the military. Because of the already challenging military constraints the first three tenets outline, the fourth tenet begins to shape that this doctrine is not your normal doctrine, stating that jihad is a religious duty and struggle, not one that can be done for nationalistic objectives. For instance, in nationalistic struggles, things like terrain matter because you may be fighting for the survival of a state or the observation of specific borders. But the first three tenets throw this concept out the window. Instead, the fourth tenet sets the foundation for a system that Iran, Hamas, and Hezbollah have developed over time, which transforms the idea of a popular war of liberation and infuses it with Islamic content, declaring that this popular war of liberation is to the glory of God and is a sacred duty for Muslims. The fifth tenet completes this thought by making it exclusive to non-state actors. The Muka Doctrine isn't only a military doctrine, it also extends into a completely alternative form of governance where Shura Councils can be formed to provide guidance for educational, health, and business institutions. This system relies on what's described as the Shurocracy, which is the key to governing and leading its people while also acting as an alternative structure to dictatorships, monarchies, and democracies. Overall, the Muka Doctrine spells out the general system that Nasrallah, as well as his partners in Hamas, have reformed their groups into effective non-state governments, capable of fighting in wars, leading people, and providing basic goods and services, all while not being tied to a specific set of land or terrain. This gives a well-rounded and sustainable structure for the forever war that the doctrine calls for against Israel. Having taken a look at a higher level, let's dig in a little deeper into the organs that make up Hezbollah. In 1992, Hezbollah would enter into the political sphere for the first time, with brand new 32-year-old Secretary General Hassan Nasrallah leading the way. This would usher in what's been described as the golden age of Hezbollah, where it earned representation in the Lebanese parliament, began to institute and provide social services, and even launched a television channel. Hezbollah would run on a political platform that took up the cause of oppressed and poor people and called for the development and growth of the economy. Still, though, Hezbollah would very openly and plainly not separate their political actions from their military objectives. As other Shia factions in Lebanon disbanded their military arm, Hezbollah would remain armed, becoming the only armed Shia political faction in Lebanon. Hezbollah would continue its al-Muqawama-style campaign against Israel throughout the 90s, prompting a large-scale response by Israel. This response saw an aerial bombardment and strike campaign targeting Hezbollah, but this would ultimately fail. The failure of the Israeli strikes to disarm Hezbollah and the success of Hezbollah strikes against Israel would gain it recognition and support across Lebanon and other parts of the Arab world. In 2000, Israel would end its occupation of Lebanon, which would mark a massive victory for Hezbollah, scoring it widespread political support. Syria, which had occupied Lebanon since the Lebanese Civil War, supported Hezbollah. But with the withdrawal of Israeli troops from Lebanon, people began to wonder why Hezbollah still had an armed wing if it had finally achieved its goal of expelling the Israeli occupiers. Syria would provide some cover for Hezbollah by supporting its armed status. However, Hezbollah would go a step further by declaring Israel's occupation of the Sheba Farms, which the UN declares was Syrian territory that had been occupied by Israel since 1967, was also a part of the resistance movement. This would become a low-level conflict known as the Sheba Farms conflict that would run from 2000 to 2005. However, this would all become more complicated in 2005 when a bomb killed the Lebanese president. Many Lebanese blamed Syria, and widespread protests led to the end of Syria's nearly 30-year occupation of Lebanon. This was bad news for Hezbollah, who lost one of its primary supporters in Lebanon and was now compelled to dive deeper into Lebanese politics. This would also increase scrutiny of Hezbollah's armed wing, which the UN and other international and domestic groups would call to be dissolved. The notion began to spread throughout Lebanon that Hezbollah wasn't a true representative of the Lebanese people, but upon an asset of Iran, giving its extensive ties in history, including its shared ideology. Hezbollah would then take a massive gamble, eager to score a much-needed victory by abducting 2 Israeli soldiers along the border. This triggered Israel's longest war since 1948 and would be disastrous for the country of Lebanon, with damage in the billions of dollars and over 1,000 Lebanese civilians killed. The Israeli Defense Force, or IDF's, goal was to completely disarm Hezbollah and demilitarize its borders. Nevertheless, it would end in a military stalemate, and Hezbollah would declare victory simply by having not lost. This would not save Hezbollah's face, and in fact, it would precede more conflicts between Hezbollah and the Lebanese government in 2008 and again in 2009 after the UN released evidence of Hezbollah's involvement in the Lebanese president's assassination 4 years earlier. In 2012, the Arab Spring plunged Syria into a civil war, and while the rest of Lebanon would abstain from the conflict, Nasrallah would later admit that Hezbollah had been fully involved in defending Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. According to Nasrallah, Syria was the backbone of the resistance against Israel. And if the Assad regime fell, then Israel would ultimately prevail and the resistance would collapse. This intervention in Syria was incredibly controversial in Lebanon, and violence soon spread throughout Lebanon. The golden age of Hezbollah was long in the rearview mirror, and Hezbollah would have to balance its military objectives and relationship with Iran with its political objectives as one of Lebanon's largest Shia parties. The rise of ISIS would further force involvement in Hezbollah. The rise of ISIS would force further involvement of Hezbollah in war, which would bolster its political image among Shia supporters. However, Hezbollah would suffer more casualties fighting ISIS than it had ever lost against fighting Israel, which ultimately would bring about more anger. In 2016, Hezbollah would score a major political victory in Lebanon. The incumbent government ended in 2014, and Hezbollah's political wing, which had an opportunity to install an ally, Lebanese Christian Michael Aoun. There existed resistance to this appointment, though, but Hezbollah maintained enough support to freeze the Lebanese government for 2 years until Aoun's appointment as president was finally approved by the Lebanese parliament. For the next 3 years, Aoun would preside over Lebanon as Hezbollah would rise in power throughout the country. And in 2019, the Lebanese economy would collapse, and rapid inflation combined with widespread protests threatened to turn the country upside down. Hezbollah once the political protectors of the poor and oppressed, mobilized fighters to beat back protesters with sticks and other weapons. The pandemic would effectively freeze the protests. However, the trouble has not ended for Hezbollah or Lebanon. In October 2022, Aoun's term ended, and since then, the Lebanese parliament has again remained deadlocked in finding a successor. Hezbollah to this day retains 12 seats in the Lebanese parliament and has maintained the ability to freeze the Lebanese government just as it had before, while at the same time the military arm of Hezbollah has grown substantially over recent years. With this foundation set on Hezbollah's history, basic structure, and ideology, let's move into the Hezbollah we know and love today. Give me just 1 second. I'll have some water. Hezbollah has grown significantly since its intervention in Syria. growing from a small band of fighters in the 90s and early 2000s to what Nasrallah claims is a total strength of 100,000 fighters. That said, this estimate by Nasrallah is almost certainly an exaggeration. Some estimates, like one by the International Institute for Strategic Studies and the Atlantic Council, placing the true figure somewhere between 42,000 to 60,000 fighters. Something that distinguishes Hezbollah and makes them appear more similar to a state is their division between active and reserve fighters. For instance, the IISS estimates separate its number to around 22,000 active fighters and 20,000 reservists, which could be called up in a time of war. Another point of emphasis for Hezbollah is rocket and missile artillery, where it's drastically ballooned its stockpile from around 14,000 missiles in 2006 to around 150,000 in 2023. For context, Hamas had, prior to October 7th, a believed strength, according to the IDF, of up to 30,000 fighters and around 30,000 missiles when combined with the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, which is another group operating out of Gaza. Clearly, Hezbollah is the bigger brother between it and Hamas, and it can bring up to twice the firepower in fighters and up to 5 times the firepower in rocket and missile artillery. Hezbollah fighters are well equipped, operating with your typical small arms, AKs, M4s, M16s, as well as RPGs and heavy machine guns, as well as other types of anti-tank systems. They're known to operate various ATGM systems or anti-tank guided missile systems, primarily the Iranian-developed systems, but some Soviet systems recovered from Iraq, Iran, and Syria also exist within their stockpile. These fighters are well equipped and well trained, but what matters most is battlefield experience, which they have in spades, with its recent wars in Syria and all throughout its history with Israel. Hezbollah further separates itself from other terrorist groups by maintaining a respectable suite of advanced weapon systems. Among those systems is potentially an armored fleet, which may include up to T-55, T-62, and T-72 tanks. The reason I say potentially here is because they were confirmed to have been trained on those systems by Syria during the Syrian civil war, and they may have access to those platforms within Syria as well as within Lebanon's own uniformed military. They also may possess other armored vehicles like BMPs and M113s, as well as older BTR variants, including the old classic Technical, which for those of you that don't know, that's just a nice Toyota Tacoma with a 50 cal or a Dishka machine gun on the back trailer. Hezbollah doesn't only possess the capability to target Israel in the U.S. on land, however. They can also target Israel and the U.S. on sea. Hezbollah has a few variants of anti-ship missiles, predominantly acquired from Iran, which include Chinese-made C-701 and C-802 anti-ship missiles. In 2006, Hezbollah fired a C-802 at the Israeli INS Hanit, killing 4 Israeli sailors. So they not only are in possession of these weapons, they've demonstrated that they know how to use them. Another innovation on the modern battlefield is the widespread availability of drones for both surveillance and attacking the enemy. Hezbollah gained and developed this capability during the Syrian civil war, and now has a series of Iranian-made and Iranian-delivered drones, namely the Mohar 4, Ababil 2 and 3, and the Yasir drone families. One Iranian-made system that has gained notoriety in the war in Ukraine is the Shahed, which Hezbollah may have in its possession, but I have not seen any confirmation of this yet. A final drone variant to note would be cheap, small personal drones capable of dropping grenades and mortars. We've seen this tactic used widely throughout Syria as well as in Ukraine, but we've also begun to see that tactic used in Gaza by Hamas. Another capability Hezbollah has is a series of anti-air capabilities, including anti-air missiles and guns. Just this last week, a report was released by the U.S. indicating that Russia had agreed for Syria to send more advanced Russian air defense systems, named the Pantsir, to Hezbollah. And while I say advanced, this system has its own lengthy service history, including getting destroyed by the IDF, aircraft in Syria. So when we say advanced, it's really relative to like a Zu-23 anti-aircraft gun. Finally, Hezbollah is believed to have received Scud missiles as well from Syria, though the quantity has not been uncovered. Hezbollah has built this force off of the support it has generated throughout Israel and the Shia Muslim world. Because of its level of support, it has been able to build an all-volunteer force, seeking only fully motivated and committed Muslims who are willing to die for the cause. This recruitment process is lengthy, beginning with what could be called a scouting period, where Hezbollah recruiters go to a village and look for potential recruits. These recruits could be watched and monitored for months to a year until they are finally approached with an offer to join. Should they accept, they are sent to initial training within Lebanon, which is facilitated by the IRGC. Once initial training is complete, though, they are then sent to advanced weapons training and guerrilla warfare training in Iran. And we'll talk about an alternative training pipeline that exists here for their civilian wing. This system also facilitates a youth movement where children from ages 6 or 7 are encouraged to participate. Hezbollah recruits people using a couple of beliefs, which include observance to Islam and the belief that we've already discussed of a type of Islamic popular resistance movement, as well as just a general hostility towards Israel and the United States. Obviously, all of this is incredibly expensive, and with the Lebanese economy more depressed than Eeyore, you might be wondering where all this money to pay for all of this is coming from. Hezbollah's finances are incredibly opaque, to the point that even the United States intelligence community doesn't have a full sense of the scale and scope of Hezbollah's support system. Chief among its external supporters is Iran, which U.S. officials estimate provides around $700 million annually. Past this support, though, Hezbollah relies on a massive, complex, and secretive money laundering system spanning all around the world. The U.S. and its partners have sanctioned and arrested individuals tied to Hezbollah, working with Colombian drug cartels in South America, working with banks and drug dealers in the United States, and facilitating smuggling in Asia. This money comes back to Lebanon, where it's moved through Lebanese financial institutions before making it back to Hezbollah. Overall, a complete financial accounting and estimate for Hezbollah is probably not realistically going to come from me or anyone else on YouTube, but you get the picture that they're well-funded with several modes of support and a complex criminal network supporting the organization. Hezbollah hedges their activity with charitable outreach throughout Lebanon, building support for the cause and for its political party. These programs include groups for children, a women's association, and an educational program. Hezbollah does give out scholarships, so if you're a high school or college student that wants to avoid student debt, consider applying for the Hezbollah scholarship. Terms and restrictions, of course, apply. These don't apply for that, by the way. These services are all robust and have been operating for decades, growing to the point where some services, like the educational system, rival even state programs of Lebanon. Hezbollah also subsidizes certain services and programs, along with building and renovating homes and schools. We've already discussed some of the specific weapon systems provided to Hezbollah by both Iran and Syria, as well as the training programs the IRGC facilitates, so we won't revisit those here. To summarize, Iran is Hezbollah's primary backer, but this relationship would not be possible in its current form without the facilitation and support of Syria. The IRGC makes routine visits to and from Syria, but they often meet with Hezbollah or are actively engaged in supporting Hezbollah's activities. When the IDF wants to make an impact on the support, they don't strike Lebanon or Iran, they strike in Syria, targeting the Damascus or Aleppo airports or other facilities within Syria. Lebanon provides massive support through its facilitation of Hezbollah, both as a dominant political party and as the only armed Shia political group in the country. Now that we've covered almost everything else, how exactly does Hezbollah make its decisions? Well, this might be one of the more important things that we can get to know about Hezbollah. Please know that this information I'm using may be outdated. So some of the members here that are shown may not be completely up to date, but generally this gives a structural idea of what the organs of Hezbollah are and what the people do. At the top of this sits the Shura Council, which oversees the 5 arms of Hezbollah. This structure allows Hezbollah to implement the concepts behind the Muka Doctrine and acts as a state without borders. The Shura Council, also called the Consultative Council, is the central decision-making authority for all of Hezbollah and is at the very top of the pyramid. They not only develop the long-term vision and strategy for Hezbollah, they also make political party decisions for the party. They do so with either majority or unanimous votes, and the decisions made within the council are considered final and religiously binding for these party members. Only the supreme leader of Iran has authority over this council, which the council regards as Wali al-Faqih. Originally, the Secretary General was one to be the first among equals in this council. However, over time, Hassan Nasrallah has made the position into a leader role within the council, reporting only to the supreme leader of Iran. The Executive Council is one of the more powerful organs within Hezbollah, managing Hezbollah's daily operations and overseeing cultural, educational, social, and political affairs. Hashem Shafadin is the deputy chairman of this council, and subordinate to him are 7 subunits: the Educational Unit, Social Unit, Islamic Health Unit, Information and Media Unit, Finance Unit, Syndicates and Unions Unit, and External Relations Unit. Hezbollah has its own private court system, which is available to anyone regardless of religious affiliation, or so they claim. This court system primarily attracts low-income people who cannot afford lawyer fees or want to seek adjudication within Hezbollah's system. This is primarily thanks to Hezbollah's free legal services for those who seek the party's adjudication, out with Judge Judy and with Sheikh Yazbek. The rulings of this court are enforced by Hezbollah, who carry out warnings, arrests, imprisonment, and executions. The Judicial Council oversees all of this with Sheikh Mohammed Yazbek as its chairman. The Parliamentary Council makes up Hezbollah's elected officials and political allies. Haj Muhammad Rad is the first to sit on this chair of the council since 1992, when Hezbollah first entered into politics, and has remained ever since. An interesting feature of this council and its members is that their positions and duties aren't in alignment with any civilian jurisdiction, but instead to the Shura Council, and the Parliamentary Council exists to keep everyone in line. The size of this council will vary depending on the size and influence of Hezbollah's primary or parliamentary representation. The Political Council is an advisory body that oversees all of the political activities within Hezbollah's area of control. This is not a decision-making body, simply an advisory one, which executes the vision of the Shura Council. This is the body that establishes and maintains Hezbollah's political allegiances, organizes campaign committees, and puts together political programs and electoral platforms. Similar to the Executive Council, the chair of the Political Council, Ibrahim Amin al-Sayed, oversees a series of groups and not specific individuals. Each of these groups manages Hezbollah's relationships with other factions and organizations. And you can see the list of them here. Finally, there's by far the best named council, the Jihad Council. As you have probably guessed, this is the military wing of Hezbollah. There are some interesting quirks about this council and how it functions, though. Unlike the other councils, the head of this council is also the Secretary General of the Shura Council of Hamas. However, it's co-chaired by someone from the armed cadre, which as of now, from what I could find, is unknown. This position had been co-chaired by Ahmad Mugi. I can't even get his last name. Ahmad, we're moving on. Until he was assassinated in Damascus in 2008. And by then his brother-in-law, Mustafa Bedreddin, was also killed in 2016, also in Syria. This council oversees all military actions of Hezbollah, coordinating military actions and providing centralized command structure. The Jihad Council is also tied to the other councils within Hezbollah, such as the execution of rulings by the Judicial Council and facilitation of activities by the other 3. This council does this by overseeing the 2 ends of Hezbollah's armed wing, the Islamic Resistance and the Security Organ. The Islamic Resistance is the main element of Hezbollah's military arm, consisting of 2 main parts: enforcement and recruitment, as well as combat. The enforcement and recruitment part covers Hezbollah's recruitment activities, where recruits are indoctrinated with Hezbollah's principles and ideology and then filtered. This filtering evaluates if recruits have demonstrated military skill or not. Those with military skill are then sent to the other. Those without military skill, are then sent to the other civilian. Excuse me. Let's reread this. Those without military skill are sent to the other civilian arms of Hezbollah to work with those arms, as well as those with military skills are sent to the combat wing of the Islamic resistance for advanced training. Under the combat wing, there are several key units that make up Hezbollah's military. The Badr unit has historically been responsible for long-range fires into northern Israel, as well as rear area security and backfilling for the Nasr unit, but more recently may have deployed to Syria near Aleppo. The Nasr unit is Hezbollah's first line of defense against Israel and is responsible for maintaining a constant stream of short to medium range fires on Israeli cities and towns in northern Israel, with the goal of punishing the civilians and to applying pressure on the Israeli government for a ceasefire. This unit is believed to be somewhere in the neighborhood of a few thousand fighters, with special forces, active and reserve fighters all throughout the south of Lebanon along the border, falling within this umbrella. The Al-Jalil unit is Hezbollah's strike force, which has received extensive training by the IRGC in Iran in infiltration tactics. The exercises and training they received, which was overseen by the late IRGC Commanding General Qassam Soleimani, was designed to somewhat reflect the attacks that we saw from Hamas on October 7th, where a massive rocket barrage across northern Israel would act as a feint to cover the Al-Jalil unit's infiltration into the Galilee area, where they would take and temporarily hold towns for a short period of time. They're currently believed to be in South Lebanon along the Nasr unit. The Aziz unit was deployed in Syria during the Civil War, where it suffered heavy casualties. It was withdrawn from Syria, and its size, strength, and disposition appear to be unknown. The Radwan unit is Hezbollah's special forces. They're well-armed, well-trained, battle-tested, having fought extensively in the Syrian Civil War before withdrawing back into Lebanon. Hezbollah also has an amphibious warfare unit, which is responsible for coastal defense. These forces are trained by Iran on raiding and sabotage tactics, and may be in possession of small watercraft and small submarines capable of delivering 3 to 7 man teams along the coastline. Finally, there are the Lebanese resistance brigades, which act as an auxiliary force behind the main fighting units. That's the conventional fighting force, but Hezbollah also has unconventional forces that comprise its intelligence apparatus and VIP security. Unit 910 is the intelligence apparatus, which executes Hezbollah's intelligence operations and extraterritorial operations throughout the Middle East. One known activity of Unit 910 is the recruitment of Israeli Arabs and Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank to act as intelligence assets via a network of Israeli Arab drug dealers that act as proxies. Those dealers identify and recruit these assets and facilitate the intelligence collection operations for Unit 910 across Israel, and are said to have managed some level of infiltration of the IDF. Finally, there's the Party Security Organ, which is responsible for internal security issues. This is the unit that's responsible for Hezbollah's counterintelligence mission, counter-protest operations, and political intelligence activities. Hezbollah is one of the world's most dangerous terrorist organizations, with support of key Middle Eastern allies and access to advanced weapons capabilities. Doctrinally, they are against recognition of Israel in all forms and will not accept peace with Israel. Their strategy of forever war will pose challenges to Israeli security and enable Iranian freedom of movement, so long as the IDF has to account for Hezbollah along Lebanon. This is more true with the recent development of Hezbollah's capabilities that threaten military and civilian infrastructure throughout Israel and the Mediterranean. Now, I've been talking for way too long, So thank you to everybody that's been watching this for this whole time. I really appreciate you more than you realize. I put a lot of work into making this the best possible presentation as that I could, and I hope that that came through.